He named Yu Bayam as the lead and transferred full operational authority to him. A ripple of shock passed through the team leaders and onlookers gathered around the table. Several questioned the choice, but quieted under the weight of the chairman's decision. Chairman Jung reminded them that authority demanded responsibility and warned against reckless action. He ordered all team leaders to obey Yu Bayam and to coordinate without delay. Those words closed debate and set the group toward a single chain of command. Chairman Jung rose and fixed the room with a cold, calm demeanor. He declared Yu Bayam effectively dead and assigned him absolute operational authority. Yu Bayam answered obediently and acknowledged the lethal responsibility thrust upon him. A subordinate shouted in alarm as leaders gathered and turned toward the speakers. Chairman Jung ordered every team leader to surrender their computers within 10 minutes. Silence fell as disbelief rippled, and Yu Bayam's terse command sealed the chain. The team leaders obeyed, though hesitation lingered on many faces. The room tensed as Yu Bayam demanded every leader surrender their computers and file a report. Murmurs swelled and faces tightened among the suits when the order landed. Yu Bayam asked whether any machines contained suspicious material and held the room with a flat, controlled voice. A leader swore and fell silent beneath the pressure. Conversation slid toward justification for destroying Biqui as older figures weighed consequences. An older man issued conditional orders and promised rewards for success. A blunt command to kill the threat, if necessary, closed the exchange and froze the room. After Yu Bayam's demand, the room remained rigid beneath a new suspicion. One leader asked if Yu Bayam was trying to find a spy among three. A pale-suited man laughed and tapped his temple. He called Yu Bayam's move interesting and tested the leader's resolve openly. The taunt spread through the corridor and tightened many faces into silence. The man dared Yu Bayam to see how far he could go. A bold title card cut the moment and marked the chapter's end. Outside a tall building, sunlight washed the facade as someone quietly called Yu Bayam. Sunlight washed the building facade as the corridor's tension faded into the outdoors. On a bench, the pink-haired man thanked the taller man and then paused. The taller man refused to call it saving and denied any responsibility. He admitted he was impressed, yet insisted he had not tried to help. The pink-haired man pressed him about sincerity and asked if that denial was true. The taller man flicked a lighter and left the question hanging between them. Sunlight washed the building facade and corridor tension eased into the outdoors. On the bench, the pink-haired man declared they were brothers. The taller man refused the claim and denied responsibility. Pink-haired pressed him to go out after work and offered to pay. The taller man refused again, yet later relented. They sat in a theater sharing popcorn and drinks. The taller man wondered why he was watching a movie with another man. He decided to use the outing to observe Steve and test if Steve was a spy. After the corridor confrontation, they left and bought tickets for a comedy. Pink-haired man laughed loudly in the screening room and filled the dark with easy mirth. The taller man remained reserved and kept watching Steve for subtle tells and reactions. A waiter announced a mint chocolate cucumber frappuccino, and the taller man noted the odd order. In the theater, a spectator shouted about gaming strategy, and the taller man compared that outburst to casual habits. They walked out together, and pink-haired man recalled being caught smoking by a teacher named Mr. Kim. The taller man stayed silent and continued his quiet test of loyalty. After the screening, they stepped back onto the street, and pink-haired man walked ahead joking about going home by 9. The protagonist followed and dismissed most details as useless, while he suspected a staged routine and noted nightly habits. Pink-haired man then called out loudly and waved to Yong Min across the way. Yong Min froze, blinked twice, then stepped forward. Pink-haired man taunted him about coming from daycare and made a crude remark about his father waiting. The protagonist watched with guarded curiosity and kept counting small tells. Yong Min stood by the doorway as someone remarked that he smelled of tobacco. He denied it and insisted he had only used e-cigars and wanted an e-cafe. The remark triggered a quiet dad and a pause. The protagonist reviewed his notes and remembered Steve listed as unmarried, which raised doubt about a sudden marriage. That doubt sharpened into anger, a fist clenched at his side. Accusations about destroying other families rose in his mind, followed by a bitter question about the accused's own family happiness. Yong Min lingered by the doorway, as others hinted he smelled of tobacco. The protagonist noted Steve listed as unmarried and felt doubt about a sudden marriage. That doubt hardened into anger, aimed at people who broke families and promises. He walked the narrow corridor, while muttering Pascal's name under his breath and clenching his fists. Someone called out Yu Baem's name, and Yong Min invited him to come in. A box of simple home-cooked food was set down on the low table between them. The protagonist stared, stunned that anyone had prepared a meal for him, and felt awkward gratitude mixed with wary suspicion. Yong Min had lingered by the doorway, while the protagonist seethed over broken promises. The box of simple food lay between them, and the protagonist felt awkward gratitude. Pink-haired man called out the favorite chicken and tteokbokki combo and set the tone light. Yong Min refused to eat, and the door slammed hard. The protagonist sat and watched the food in silence. Pink-haired man noted Yong Min's strained bond with his son and asked where his wife was. Yong Min denied marriage and demanded who they meant by that kid. Another voice began to answer and trailed off. Yong Min had stayed near the doorway while the protagonist sat silent, the food untouched between them. Pink-haired man steered the talk toward family and pressed about that kid. Yong Min denied any marriage. Another voice answered and identified the target as the son of a dead colleague. Pink-haired man said they had once been close, then discovered the colleague was a police officer, and then bluntly declared he had killed the man. The confession broke the room's tension and the protagonist froze, unable to respond. Pink-haired man stood in the doorway and admitted he had killed the colleague. He said the son had watched him do it with his own hands. The sudden confession filled the room and knocked conversation into stunned silence. The protagonist sat on the couch unmoving and stared at his hands. Others resumed talk as if it were ordinary, calling violence normal in their field. The protagonist's thoughts shuddered, briefly imagining the man could be decent before collapsing into disgust. He judged pink-haired man in his head and felt betrayed and cold. Pink-haired man's confession still hung in the air, making the room brittle. The protagonist stood, said it was late, and moved toward the door without meeting eyes. Pink-haired man urged him to stay, then announced they would move against Beak Gui tomorrow and told him to rest. The protagonist pressed for the plan. Pink-haired man refused to share details, saying he would delay informing others to prevent leaks. The exchange was short and guarded. Monitors glowed behind them as people resumed their work. The protagonist left unsettled and unanswered. Pink-haired man's confession hung in the air and left the room brittle. The protagonist rose, said it was late, and went to the door without looking back. He left unsettled and unanswered. The next day the house of Beakwi burned behind its gate as men gathered. Suit messengers rushed in and told Beakwi about the one they had sent. They said the one had dispatched the man who beat the vice president. Beakwi sat on a raised seat and listened, then ordered them to admit the visitor. Heavy footsteps crossed the hall as a figure moved toward the inner chamber. Beakwi leaned forward and demanded to know who had beaten his son. Yu Baem walked down the center aisle between lined suits with steady steps. He answered plainly that he was the one and admitted responsibility. He then bowed his head briefly and introduced himself as Yu Baem. The assembled men remained silent and watched every motion in the hall. Beakwi studied the young man and remembered reports that he had joined one. He judged the newcomer and noted that he seemed brave and alone. Beakwi had leaned forward and judged the newcomer brave and alone among the lined suits. A young man called Hoon erupted from the crowd and demanded they kill the target at once. Someone sharply told him to be quiet and stop his shouting. Beakwi then forbade murder, saying killing a human being contradicted his ideology. He ordered instead that their torturing device be brought in for punishment. Two men carried a heavy iron statue through the hall and set it forward. The plaque named the device Iron Maiden SS-class torture. The assembled men watched the device between accusation and consequence. Beakwi had ordered the Iron Maiden brought forward, and two suits carried the statue into the hall. A man shouted opening Maiden, and the plaque on the device confirmed its SS class designation. Several onlookers gagged and covered their noses at the smell of rotten blood drifting from the coffin. Beaky stepped forward and smiled as he told them that suffering was merely another face of pleasure. He leered and demanded the protagonist prepare to enjoy extreme torture. The protagonist said nothing and stared at the Iron Maiden and the men assembled. Beaky had the Iron Maiden brought into the hall and watched the crowd recoil at the foul scent. Onlookers gagged as rotten blood drifted from the coffin while Beaky smiled and stepped forward. He expected the protagonist to flinch, but the protagonist remained motionless and offered no response. Beaky decided the silence made the moment sweeter and chose to savor breaking the newcomer. A large man strode in holding a long blade and took position near the coffin. Down a corridor, two men mocked the newcomer's nerve until a dark-suited figure interrupted. He said he had not been dragged in, but had come as the designer of one to propose a deal. Beaky ordered the Iron Maiden into the hall and watched the crowd recoil. Onlookers gagged as rotten blood drifted from the coffin into the air. Beaky stepped forward and expected the newcomer to flinch. The protagonist stood motionless and offered no response to Beaky. Beaky decided the silence made his victory sweeter. A large man took position beside the coffin, holding a long blade. Down a corridor, two men mocked the newcomer's nerve until a dark-suited man intervened. He said he had arrived deliberately and identified himself as the designer of one. One corridor man shouted in outrage while the designer calmly asked them to take a look. Beaky ordered the Iron Maiden into the hall and watched the crowd recoil as rotten blood drifted from the coffin. The protagonist stood motionless and drew no reaction. Beaky savored the silence while a large man readied a blade. Two men mocked the newcomer until the designer of one intervened. He stepped forward and asked them to look. He produced a tablet and showed an announcement. It read that Bitmain itself released a stable coin. Beaky's face went white and the room fell into tense silence. After the announcement, the designer of one revealed the coin's name aloud, MAINCOIN. He presented a report on reserved asset status and held the tablet for everyone to read. Attendees scanned the figures and exchanged glances. One man asked if the paper had been an apology note. Another dismissed the offering as almost a scam and called the price unbearably high. Murmurs spread and the group's confidence wavered. The scene then cut to a few hours earlier. In a small room, pink-haired man and Yong Min pressed Yu Bayam for a plan to beat Beaky. Yu Bayam remained thoughtful. Attendees heard the designer of one name the new coin and read the reserve asset report aloud. They scanned the figures, traded doubtful glances, and raised questions about legitimacy. Accusations spread quickly, and the group's confidence wavered across the entire room. Earlier that day, in a conference room, pink-haired man and Yong Min pressed Yu Bayam for a plan. Yu Bayam refused to name Beaky and instead announced his plan to destroy the coin exchange Bitmain. The declaration stunned the group and drew shocked responses from the table. One woman called the objective impossible, but Yu Bayam argued Bitmain was not an ordinary exchange. In the conference room, attendees heard that Bitmain was not an ordinary coin exchange. Speakers stated it served foreign gangs and acted as a money laundering hub. A monitor showed coins inside a rotating drum. They announced Bitmain had released the main coin and that its price barely fluctuated. One woman asked if the coin existed to launder gang funds. The room fell silent as presenters confirmed the claim. Murmurs rose and faces tightened when the laundering imagery filled the screen. Presenters dismantled the coin's legitimacy and showed coins tumbling in a rotating drum. They said the reserved asset was in disorder and the guarantee system was worthless. They accused Beaky of behaving like a stable coin while scamming investors. The room fell quiet as charts and sketches mapped how foreign gangs trusted the Beaky network. Presenters explained Bitmain had used the maincoin as collateral to gain leverage and grow itself. Suits and onlookers traded stunned looks as murmurs rose and the accusations settled over the conference. The implication hit hard. Presenters pressed the accusation that main coin was worthless and that guests needed to know. They argued telling foreign VIPs would empty rooms and damage Bitmain's reputation. Suits listened as the claim framed Bequee's guarantees as a sham and main coin as trash. Charts and murmurs reinforced the link to foreign networks and leverage. In a dim corridor, two men discussed telling VIP guests, naming Bequee's vulnerability as the lever. The room's tension tightened as the plan to expose the coin began to promise immediate reputational ruin. An armed man ordered them to go tell VIPs while he brandished a saw. The sudden threat froze the corridor's conversation and drew shocked reactions. Two men stood opposite each other as one praised the other's research. The praising man admitted respect but dismissed any immediate payoff significance. He warned they were not working for small fees and eyed leverage beyond borders. Another confirmed that most VIPs belonged to foreign gangs and criminal networks. The plan to expose Bequee's coin shifted from reputational harm toward strategic international pressure. An agitated man taunted the group about their lack of VIP contact information and leaned forward. He warned the VIP's contacts were tightly encrypted and derided any casual outreach like a snap. Suited men traded frustrated questions about how to contact the VIPs while a kneeling subordinate listened. The leader declared their plans incomplete, then stomped and shouted for Shorty. He then raised a saw and charged, screaming as the corridor erupted into panic and flinches. Everyone reacted with fear and shock. A corridor had erupted into panic after the leader shouted and charged with a raised saw. Men in suits argued about reaching hidden VIP contacts, while a kneeling subordinate listened in fear. Then a different figure challenged their assumptions and taunted them about access. He slid a ledger across the floor, then displayed it openly for everyone to see. He announced contacts across Hong Kong, China, and the US, and for 32 gangs. The room demanded confirmation, and the presenter said he had already made reservations for those contacts. He added the ledger tied to their Bitmain network connections. Onlookers went silent and realized their VIP contacts had been exposed publicly. The corridor had erupted again as the leader shouted and demanded answers about the leak. He accused someone of exposing contact information and asset status. A man answered that they had obtained the material from the leader's son. A presenter then stepped forward and precisely named the son's computer as the source. The leader paused, asked for confirmation, and then understood the implication. Realization turned to rage, and he shouted a curse while pointing blame. The corridor had exploded into accusations when a presenter revealed the leak's origin. He stated the files came from the leader's son, and specifically from that son's computer. The leader demanded confirmation and pressed the room for an explanation immediately. A young man at a terminal looked bewildered and asked what computer meant. A narrator then recalled a recent meeting with Bequee where tensions escalated. Bequee had tried to provoke Yu Bayam and triggered a violent response. Yu Bayam struck, stunned the boy, and the provocateur collapsed unconscious before witnesses. The presenter had just exposed the leak coming from the leader's son and computer. Tension snapped when Yu Bayam struck the provocateur and laid him out unconscious. Yu Bayam then smiled and approached the fallen vice president at the terminal. He warned the room the vice president would not wake for another 2 hours. In that window, they used the vice president's fingerprint to unlock his computer. They copied all files and extracted contact lists for international gangs and contacts. The presenter and onlookers watched stunned by the speed and implication of the theft. Pink-haired man and the unidentified woman stood in the corridor and discussed what happened. They recalled the vice president being subdued and the team copying files with his fingerprint. A panel showed a laptop and a suggestion that he had used his father to access it. They turned to his composure and the fact he never panicked when threatened. They debated whether he lacked emotion or hid his fear behind a practiced mask. Both decided his steadiness felt deliberate and meant he was concealing something vital. Pink-haired man and the unidentified woman continued their corridor exchange about the subdued vice president and his unreadable composure. They observed a flash of intense, overwhelming emotion in the shadowed man and agreed to remain cautious around him. Later, the team reviewed the vice president's terminal access and said their fingerprint copy had yielded leads. They searched his computer thoroughly and found no records of the so-called main coin. The woman re-examined the paper he had shown earlier and concluded it was fabricated to mislead them. They suspected someone had staged evidence to hide the real trail. Pink-haired man and the unidentified woman had concluded the vice president's paper was fabricated to mislead them. Later, the presenter walked into the hall holding the ledger and declared it fake. He told the gathered onlookers that no one inside had noticed the deception. They were dazzled by Yu Baeum's charisma. He explained the plan for a fearless newbie to enter alone and act unafraid. The crowd remained unaware that the apparent proof was staged and that Yu Baeum had orchestrated the illusion. Pink-haired man and the unidentified woman debated whether the key evidence was fabricated. Pink-haired man argued the false lead was necessary because no one would expect a brave newbie. They concluded the newcomer posed as a confident mark to scam the scammers.